The shovel struck frozen earth with a hollow thud as Reverend Cornelius Whitmore commanded his congregation to seal away this vessel of sin. 19-year-old Lirelei Ashford clawed desperately at the rough pine box, her fingertips already bloodied from trying to escape what the townspeople of Millbrook Hollow called divine justice. 3 days earlier, she had been discovered in the barn with merchant's son Percival Grimsby, though nothing improper had occurred, merely a stolen kiss and whispered promises of marriage. But Percival had fled town rather than face his father's wrath, leaving Lirelei to bear the scandal alone. As an orphan dependent on the church's charity, she had no defenders when the accusations of wantonness began. "She has brought corruption upon our godly community," Whitmore had declared from his pulpit. "The scriptures are clear better that a millstone be hung about her neck than she should cause others to stumble." Now, as dirt began falling onto the coffin lid above her, Lirelei's screams grew hoarse. The sound of her fists pounding against the wood grew weaker as precious air dwindled. Through the gaps between the boards, she could see flickering torchlight and the satisfied faces of the very people who had once praised her needlework and gentle manner. Hours passed in suffocating darkness. Her breathing became shallow, each intake more labored than the last. She pressed her face to the largest gap, desperately seeking fresh air, when suddenly the torchlight disappeared entirely. The voices faded into the distance. Just as consciousness began to slip away, she heard something impossible, the soft whisper of an arrow cutting through air, followed by a man's voice speaking in a language she didn't recognize. Cherokee, perhaps? Though few natives remained in these parts since the Great Removal 15 years prior. The sound of digging resumed, but this time from above, urgent and purposeful. Clods of earth were being hurled aside with practiced efficiency. Lirelei managed one weak cry before her voice failed entirely. "Hold fast, little sparrow," came a deep voice in accented English. "I am Kadoka Bright Arrow. The spirits have guided me to you." The coffin lid splintered under the strike of a tomahawk. Cool night air rushed in, sweet as honey to her starved lungs. Strong hands reached down, lifting her with surprising gentleness from what should have been her grave dot in the moonlight. She glimpsed her rescuer, a Cherokee warrior perhaps 30 years of age, his long black hair adorned with eagle feathers, his buckskin clothing marked with intricate beadwork. His dark eyes held a mixture of fury and compassion as he gathered her trembling form against his broad chest. "What manner of people bury the living?" he asked, his voice tight with controlled rage. Lirelei tried to speak but could only manage a broken whisper. "They said, I brought shame. Kadoka's jaw tightened. "The only shame here belongs to those who call themselves godly while committing such evil." He wrapped his elk-hide cloak around her shivering form. "You are safe. Now, my grandmother Atsila will tend to your wounds." As he carried her away from the desecrated grave, Lirelei caught sight of 3 arrows embedded in nearby trees, warning shots. She realized, meant to scatter any townspeople who might have lingered to witness her death. This Cherokee hunter had not only saved her life but had done so with remarkable restraint, shedding no blood despite the provocation. Atsila's healing lodge sat hidden deep in the forest, where morning mist clung to ancient oaks like ancestral spirits. The elderly Cherokee woman worked with weathered hands, applying poultices of golden seal and wild ginger to Lirelei's torn fingertips while muttering prayers in her native tongue. "The earth spirits whispered of your burial," Atsila explained. In heavily accented English, her dark eyes kind but knowing. "They told my grandson that innocence would cry out from the ground this night. Kadoka has never failed to heed their call." Lirelei winced as the medicine stung her wounds. "I don't understand. Why would your spirits care about someone like me? Someone like you?" Atsila's weathered face creased with what might have been amusement. Child, you speak as though you are less than the deer in the forest or the hawk in the sky. The Creator makes no worthless things. Through the lodge's opening, Lirelei could see Kadoka speaking with two other Cherokee men, their voices low and urgent. She caught fragments of their conversation words about the town, about justice, about the white man's twisted ways. He wants to ride into your settlement and demand answers, Atsila continued, following her gaze. But I have counseled patience. Sometimes the spirits work in ways that seem slow to young warriors. Over the following days, as Lirelei's physical wounds healed, she learned about her unlikely saviors. Kadoka and his small band were among the few Cherokee who had managed to avoid the forced removal west. They lived as ghosts in their ancestral forests, hunting and gathering in the old ways while avoiding contact with the white settlements. We are the Nighthawk clan, Kadoka explained one evening as they sat beside the fire. We are sworn to protect those who cannot protect themselves, regardless of the color of their skin or the prayers they speak. Lirelei found herself drawn to this man who moved through the forest like flowing water, who could track a deer for miles without disturbing a single twig, yet whose hands were gentle enough to coax frightened birds to eat from his palm. He was unlike any man she had ever known. There was no cruelty in him, no desire to dominate or possess. In my grandmother's vision, he told her one night, she saw a white dove trapped in a cage of thorns. The dove's song had the power to heal old wounds between our peoples, but first it had to learn to fly free. Am I the dove in this vision? Lirelei asked, though she suspected the answer. Kadoka's smile was gentle. What do you think, little sparrow? As autumn deepened into winter, Lirelei learned Cherokee ways, how to read the forest signs, how to move silently through underbrush, how to find food and medicine in what white settlers saw as empty wilderness. More importantly, she learned about herself. Away from Millbrook Hollow's suffocating judgments, her true nature began to emerge. She had always possessed an unusual gift with healing, able to sense when someone was unwell and knowing instinctively which plants might help. The Cherokee recognized this as a sacred ability, something to be nurtured rather than feared as witchcraft. The spirits speak through you, Atsila observed one day after Lirelei successfully treated a young brave's infected wound. This is why they guided my grandson to save you. You have work to do in this world. But even as Lirelei found peace in the Cherokee camp, she knew her presence brought danger to these kind people. Sooner or later, the men of Millbrook Hollow would come looking for her, if only to ensure their secret remained buried. The first snow of winter had barely begun to fall when Percival Grimsby returned to Millbrook Hollow, his conscience finally overcoming his cowardice. What he discovered sent him into a rage that echoed through the settlement like thunder. You buried her alive? His voice cracked with horror as he confronted his father in their grand parlor. Lirelei Ashford was innocent. We shared nothing more than words of love and a single kiss. Merchant Tobias Grimsby barely looked up from his ledger. The girl was a temptation to decent men. Reverend Whitmore handled the matter appropriately. Handled the matter? Percival's hand shook as he grabbed his father's shoulders. She was to be my wife. I left to gather courage to ask for her hand properly, and you murdered her. Keep your voice down, Tobias hissed. What's done is done. The town is better for it. But Percival was already striding toward the door. We'll see about that. His confrontation with Reverend Whitmore was even more explosive. The sanctimonious preacher showed no remorse, quoting scripture about the wages of sin until Percival struck him across the face, sending the holy man sprawling. You will take me to her grave this instant, Percival demanded, or I'll expose your crime to every settlement between here and Charleston. When they reached the burial site at dawn, they found only an empty hole and scattered earth. The coffin lay broken open, its splintered lid bearing the marks of a tomahawk. 3 arrows remained embedded in nearby trees like silent sentinels. Indians. Whitmore whispered, his face pale with fear. They've taken the body. Percival knelt beside the disturbed grave, his heart pounding with impossible hope. Could Lirelei have somehow survived? The amount of blood on the coffin's interior suggested desperate struggle, but there was no corpse, no signs of decay. "Gather the men," he ordered, his voice cold with purpose. "We're going to find her." Meanwhile, in the Cherokee camp, Lirelei felt the change coming like animals sense approaching storms. The forest had grown too quiet, and Kadoka returned from his morning hunt with troubled eyes. "White men track through the woods like wounded bears," he reported to the Council of Elders. "They show no respect for the forest's balance breaking. Branches, leaving clear trails, speaking loudly of revenge." Atsela nodded grimly. The spirits warned this time would come. The girl's presence here was always meant to be temporary. "Then I'll leave," Lirelei said immediately. "I won't bring harm to your people." "Where would you go?" Kadoka asked. "They will hunt you until they find you, and this time they will make certain you do not survive." "Perhaps," said Atsila thoughtfully, "it is time for the dove to remember. She has wings." Over the next several days, as the search party from Millbrook Hollow grew larger and more desperate, the Cherokee prepared for what they knew must come. But their preparations were not for war, they were for something far more dangerous to the white. Settlements carefully constructed lies. Lirelei had learned much during her months among the Cherokee, including how to move unseen through forest and shadow. More importantly, she had learned who she truly was beneath the shame and fear that Millbrook Hollow had wrapped around her like chains. "I have an idea," she told Kadoka one evening as they watched the distant glow of the searchers' campfires. "But it will require great courage from both of us." He studied her face in the firelight, seeing the strength that had grown there during her time in the wilderness. "Tell me, what if the dove chose not to fly away, but instead to return to the cage and sing so loudly that everyone would hear? What if she sang the truth?" The plan was audacious in its simplicity. As the search party from Millbrook Hollow finally tracked the Cherokee band to their winter camp, they would find not a stolen corpse or savage kidnappers, but something far more disturbing to their ordered world, a transformed woman who refused to be silenced. Percival led the 20-man group through the forest, his heart torn between hope and dread. Behind him rode his father, Reverend Whitmore, and several of the town's most prominent citizens, all armed and expecting to find evidence of their crime safely disposed of by Cherokee hands. "Remember," Whitmore called out as they approached, "the camp. We are dealing with heathens who know nothing of Christian mercy. Be prepared for treachery." But when they reached the clearing, they found the Cherokee waiting peacefully, their weapons laid aside in a gesture of non-aggression that confused the white men. Kadoka stood at the center of the group, magnificent in his winter regalia of white elk hide and silver ornaments. "You have come far from your town," he said in perfect English, his voice carrying the quiet authority of a natural leader. "What brings armed men into our winter camp?" "You know well enough," Tobias Grimsby snarled. "Return what you have stolen, and we might let you live." "Stolen?" Kadoka's expression remained impassive. "We take nothing that does not belong to us. But perhaps you seek something you have lost?" At his subtle signal, the Cherokee parted to create a clear path. From the largest lodge emerged a figure that struck the white men speechless, Lirelei. Ashford, but transformed beyond recognition. Gone was the timid orphan girl in her patched dress and downcast eyes. This woman wore Cherokee clothing of soft doeskin decorated with intricate beadwork, her auburn hair braided with eagle feathers, her posture straight and proud. Most unsettling of all were her eyes, no longer fearful and pleading, but bright, with intelligence and absolute fearlessness. "Hello, Percival," she said calmly. "I wondered when you would return." Percival slid from his horse, his voice barely a whisper. "Lirelei? But how we found your grave empty, you thought I was dead." She stepped forward, and several of the townsmen instinctively backed away. "As you intended me to be." Reverend Whitmore found his voice first, his face flushing with righteous indignation. "This is an abomination. These savages have corrupted you beyond redemption. You were meant to die for your sins?" Lirelei's voice cut through his bluster like a blade. "To be silent so your precious congregation wouldn't have to face the truth about their godliness? You brought shame upon our community," Tobias Grimsby declared. "A woman of loose morals a woman who shared a single kiss with your son and dared to hope for love?" Lirelei laughed, and the sound held no trace of the frightened girl they remembered. "Tell me, which of you has never kissed before marriage? Which of you has never felt desire or spoken words of affection?" Murmurs arose from the townsmen, several looking uncomfortable. They had expected to find a victim, not an accuser. "The Cherokee have shown me something you never could," Lirelei continued, her voice carrying clearly through the winter air. "They've shown me that a woman's worth isn't determined by the judgment of men who fear their own shadows. They've taught me that true shame lies not in loving freely, but in bearing the innocent to hide your own weakness." Kadoka moved to stand beside her, his presence both protective and proud. "This woman came to us broken by your cruelty. We have helped her remember her strength. Among our people, she is honored as a healer, as one who speaks with the spirits of growing things." "Witchcraft," Whitmore hissed. "I knew she was touched by evil." "The only evil here," Lirelei replied, "walked into this camp armed and ready for murder. But I offer you something better than the violence you came seeking. I offer you the truth." She raised her voice, speaking not just to the search party, but to the forest itself, as if her words might carry on the wind back to Millbrook Hollow. "Let all who hear witness that I, Lirelei Ashford, stand before you alive and whole, saved by the mercy of the Cherokee from a grave dug by Christian hands. Let them know that love is not shame, that kindness knows no color, and that those who bury the innocent in the name of God serve only their own fear." The silence that followed Lirelei's declaration stretched taut as a bowstring. Snow began to fall more heavily, dusting the shoulders of the mounted townsmen and muffling the forest sounds around them. Percival stood frozen between two worlds, the familiar weight of his father's expectations and the magnetic pull of the woman he had loved and lost and now found transformed. "You can't believe this savage nonsense," his father said, though his voice lacked its usual conviction. "These people have filled your head with heathen ideas. Come home, and we'll find a way to restore you to Christian society." Lirelei's laugh was soft but cutting. "Restore me? To what, another shallow grave when I become inconvenient again?" "That was never meant to happen," Percival said desperately, stepping closer despite the warning looks from his companions. "I swear to you, I never knew what they planned. If I had been here, but you weren't here." Her voice held no malice, only a sad wisdom that made her seem far older than her 19 years. "You ran when courage was needed most. That is the difference between you and him." She nodded toward Kadoka, who remained silent but alert, reading the tension in the group like a predator assessing threats. Several Cherokee warriors had emerged from the surrounding forest, not threatening but clearly present. Reverend Whitmore's composure finally cracked. "This is an affront to God and nature. A white woman living among savages in sin and degradation. Careful." "Holy man." Kadoka's voice was soft, but it carried the promise of violence. "You speak of degradation while standing above a grave you dug for an innocent woman. Your God may tolerate such hypocrisy, but Cherokee justice does not. You dare threaten a man of God? I threaten no one. I merely observe that your God seems very forgiving of murder when performed by his servants. Atsila appeared beside them, her ancient face serene despite the tension crackling through the air. She spoke in Cherokee to her grandson, who nodded grimly before translating. My grandmother reminds us of the old prophecy that a time would come when the healing power of women would bridge the gap between our peoples. But first, the lies that separate us must be exposed to light. What lies? Percival asked, though. Something in his expression suggested he already suspected the answer. Lirelay studied him for a long moment. The lie that your people are more civilized than those you call savage. The lie that your God sanctions murder when performed quietly. The lie that a woman's value is measured only by her compliance with men's fears. She turned to address the entire group. I could return with you now. I could pretend to be the broken, grateful girl you expect, beg forgiveness for surviving your execution, and live out my days as a cautionary tale for other women who dare to love freely. Then come, Tobias Grimsby said eagerly. We can arrange a proper marriage to my son. Put this unfortunate episode behind us. Or, Lirelay continued as if he hadn't spoken, I could stay here among people who value truth over comfort and use the gifts the spirits have awakened in me to help those who cannot help themselves. Kadaka's hand found hers, their fingers interlacing with natural ease. The gesture was subtle but unmistakable, and several of the townsmen shifted uncomfortably in their saddles. You would choose a savage over your own kind? Whitmore demanded. I choose a good man over bad ones, Lirelay replied simply. I choose people who save lives over those who bury them. I choose love over fear. The words hung in the cold air like a challenge. Percival's face went white, then red, as the full implications hit him. You mean to marry him? Cherokee marriage is not the same as your Christian ceremony, Atsila said in her careful English. It is a joining of spirits, a promise to walk the same path and tend the same fire. It cannot be forced or bought or arranged for convenience. But it can be chosen freely, Lirelay added, her eyes never leaving Kadoka's face, by two people who have seen each other's hearts and found them worthy. The Cherokee warrior squeezed her hand gently. The choice is yours to make, little sparrow. But know that whatever you choose, you will always have a place among the Nighthawk clan. For the first time since the confrontation began, Lirelay smiled, expression of pure joy that transformed her face completely. It was the smile of a woman who had found herself and would never be lost again. Then I choose love, she said. I choose truth. I choose life. The wedding took place 3 days later. As winter tightened its grip on the Cherokee camp, word of the ceremony had spread through the forest network of native settlements, drawing witnesses from tribes that had maintained their freedom in the hidden places. White men never thought to search. Lirelay had expected the townsmen to leave immediately after her declaration, but Percival had stubbornly remained, claiming he would not abandon her to savagery. His father and most of the search party had returned to Millbrook Hollow, but the young merchant sat by his small fire just outside the Cherokee camp, a solitary figure of grief and obsession. He believes he can wait until you come to your senses, Kadoka observed, watching Percival through the trees. Some men cannot accept that a woman might choose another path than the one they have planned for her. Will he be trouble? Lirelay asked, though she was more concerned for Percival's safety than her own. The Cherokee warriors had been remarkably patient with his presence, but their tolerance was not infinite. Not if he remains peaceful. But I fear his heart is eating itself with regret and wounded pride. The marriage ceremony itself was unlike anything Lirelay could have imagined. There was no church, no formal pronouncements, no exchange of rings or property. Instead, Kadoka and Lirale sat facing each other in the center of a circle formed by the entire Cherokee community. Their hands joined while Atsila spoke ancient words of blessing. "Marriage is not ownership," the elderly woman explained in both Cherokee and English, ensuring all present understood. "It is partnership. Two spirits choosing to share one fire, two paths becoming one trail. The man does not rule the woman, nor the woman the man. They rule together, each bringing their own gifts to strengthen the whole." Lirale felt the truth of those words sink into her soul. This was not the submissive bondage that Christian marriage would have demanded, but an unad, equal joining of minds and hearts. Kadoka's dark eyes held promises of respect, protection, and a love that would never seek to diminish her light. As part of the ceremony, both bride and groom spoke their intentions before the gathered witnesses. Kadoka's words were simple, but profound. "I promise to walk beside you, not before or behind you. I promise to tend our fire when you are weary, and to let you tend it when I am weak. I promise to honor the gifts the spirits have placed in your hands, and to never ask you to be less than who you are." When it came time for Lirale to speak, she felt the weight of her transformation, the distance she had traveled from the frightened orphan girl buried alive by her own people. "I promise to bring healing where there is hurt, truth where there are lies, and courage where there is fear. I promise to stand with you against those who would harm the innocent, and to use whatever gifts I have been given in service of life rather than death." The ceremony concluded with the sharing of a sacred pipe and the blessing of the four directions. As husband and wife, they received new names, and Cherokee Kadoka remained Bright Arrow, but Lirale became Atsadi Svi, meaning fish woman, a name that honored her ability to move between two worlds like a fish swimming between streams. The celebration that followed lasted until dawn, with traditional dances, storytelling, and songs that seemed to make the very forest alive with joy. Even some of the more distant Cherokee who had been suspicious of accepting a white woman into their ranks seemed moved by the obvious love between the Pidam newlyweds. But as the festivities reached their peak, a commotion arose at the edge of the camp. Percival had finally broken, his patience and sanity shattered by watching the woman he loved marry another man. He stumbled into the firelight, a pistol in his shaking hand, his face wild with grief and rage. "This is madness," he shouted, his voice breaking. "Lirale, you can't mean to throw away everything, your people, your faith, your very soul for this." The Cherokee warriors moved with fluid precision, surrounding him before he could fully raise the weapon. But Kadoka held up a hand, stopping them from closing in. "Let him speak," the Cherokee leader said calmly. "A man's heart must find its own peace." Percival's pistol wavered as he looked around the circle of faces, some concerned, some angry, but all focused on him with an intensity that made him suddenly aware of how outnumbered and outmatched he was. "I loved her first," he said desperately. "We were meant to be together. If I hadn't left, if I had been braver. But you did leave," Lirale said gently, rising to face him with no fear in her posture. "And I died because of it. The girl you loved is buried in that grave you found empty. I am someone new now." "No," Percival whispered, tears streaming down his face. "You're still her. You're still my Lirale. I was never yours, Percival. And I never could have been what you wanted me to be." The pistol slipped from his nerveless fingers as the full weight of his loss finally crushed him. He sank to his knees in the snow, sobbing like a child. Spring came early that year, as if the forest itself was eager to witness the new life blooming in the Cherokee camp. Lirale's belly had begun to round with her first child, and her reputation as a gifted healer had spread beyond the boundaries of her adopted tribe. White settlers from distant homesteads began appearing at the camp's edge, led by desperate need rather than prejudice. A farmer's wife bleeding dangerously after childbirth, a child burning with fever that refused to break, an old man whose wounds from a bear attack would not heal, all found their way to Atsadisvi. The white Cherokee woman whose hand seemed touched by healing spirits. She turned no one away, regardless of the color of their skin or the suspicion in their eyes. Her Cherokee family watched with growing pride as she fulfilled the prophecy. Atsila had spoken, becoming a bridge between two worlds, healing not just bodies but the bitter divisions that had torn the land apart. Percival had finally left in late winter, broken but perhaps beginning to heal. Before departing, he had sought out Lirelei for one final conversation. "I want you to know," he had said, his voice steady for the first time since his return. "I've written letters to newspapers in Charleston and Richmond about what really happened here, about the Cherokee who saved you when my people tried to murder you. The truth needs to be told." It was a small gesture, but perhaps the beginning of a larger change. Now, as Lirelei sat beside the stream that ran through their territory, she felt her child move restlessly within her womb. Kadoka approached silently, settling beside her with the natural grace that had first captured her attention. "Atsila says the baby will come with the next full moon," he said, his hand covering hers over the curve of her belly. "She also says this child will have powerful medicine, the best of both worlds flowing in their blood. And what do you say?" Lirelei asked, leaning into his warmth. "I say that any child born of such love will know no limits to what they can accomplish." They sat in comfortable silence, watching the water flow over the stones worn smooth by countless seasons. In the distance, smoke rose from the cooking fires of their Cherokee family, and closer to hand, herbs and medicinal plants grew in the garden Lirelei had cultivated under Atsila's patient guidance. "Do you ever regret it?" Kadoka asked eventually. "Leaving your old life behind completely?" Lirelei considered the question seriously. "I regret the pain it caused good people like Percival. I regret that fear and prejudice make such choices necessary. But I could never regret choosing life over death, love over duty, truth over comfort. And if they come again? Your former people seeking to reclaim you or punish us for harboring you. Then we face them together," she said simply. "As we face everything together." As if summoned by their conversation, a young Cherokee runner appeared on the far bank of the stream. He called out in rapid Cherokee, his message urgent but not alarmed. Kadoka listened intently, then translated for his wife. "Riders approach from the east, but these carry no weapons and fly a white flag. Their leader is known to us at Cherokee, who works as an interpreter for the government agents. He brings word of change." The delegation that arrived that afternoon brought news that would reshape their world. The federal government, pressured by newspaper accounts of Cherokee heroism and the growing testimonies of white settlers helped by Lirelei's healing work, was reconsidering its policies toward the remaining eastern Cherokee. "There is talk of official recognition," the interpreter explained as the council gathered to hear his words. "Designated lands where Cherokee can live according to traditional ways without interference. And there is specific mention of the woman called Atsadisvi, whose work healing both Cherokee and white has become known even in Washington." Lirelei felt Kadoka's hand tighten on hers. Recognition meant safety for their people, but it also meant visibility, scrutiny, and the potential for new kinds of interference. "What do they want from us?" Atsila asked, her ancient eyes sharp with suspicion earned through decades of broken promises. "To meet with Atsadisvi, to hear her story firsthand and learn how she has managed to bring peace between peoples who have been enemies for generations." That evening, as the council debated this unprecedented opportunity, Lirelei walked again to her favorite spot by the stream. The child within her kicked vigorously, as if eager to be born into a world where Cherokee and white might coexist in mutual respect rather than mutual fear. Kadoka found her there, as she had known he would. "Whatever we decide," he said, "we decide together." "Together," she agreed, watching the first stars appear in the darkening sky. "Always together." In the distance, a nighthawk called, the sound that had given their clan its name. It was the voice of transition, the bird, that flew between day and night, between earth and sky. Like their love, it bridged two worlds that most believed could never meet. As autumn painted the forest in shades of gold and crimson, Lirale delivered a daughter whose eyes held the wisdom of both her peoples. They named her Wea Atsadi Wolfwoman, for she would be fierce enough to protect both worlds she would inherit. The delegation from Washington came and went, leaving behind promises that might or might not be kept. But in the Cherokee camp beside the Laughing Stream, a new kind of family grew strong, one founded not on the divisions that men created, but on the love that the spirits blessed and the earth itself celebrated. And sometimes, when the wind was right and the moon was full, travelers passing through those mountains would swear they heard the sound of laughter echoing through the forest, the voices of people who had learned that the greatest strength comes not from standing apart, but from choosing to stand together.